Hello and welcome to Teachers Teach Teachers! My name is Kaylee Brzezinski and today I have two special guests with me. Today I have Gabe. Gabe, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm currently a history teacher in the 10th grade. I teach world history and I also teach U.S. history in the 11th grade.
That's so awesome. Do you have a preference on which one you like better?
Probably world history. I just like that you learn a lot more outside rather than just being very closed-minded.
That sounds awesome. And you teach at the same school that Ryan does, correct?
Yes, we teach at Empowered.
Awesome. And Ryan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I also teach at Empower, like Gabe said, and I teach mostly a U.S. history, and I also teach economics and government to the 12th graders.
Do you also have a preference?
I love U.S. history, but government's not too bad either.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. Let's get right into the topics that we want to cover. I know that most of my listeners already know that I'm an English teacher. I think that we can all agree that it is important to learn from other teachers, especially English teachers who can help with other content areas, including literacy instructions. As part of doing that, I think we all have to agree that there are some specific developmental issues, cultural and language characteristics that differ across the selected grade level of students that should be considered when planning instructions. One of the most important, in my professional opinion, is the reading levels that differ along in a classroom and differ amongst different students from the people sitting right next to each other. One student could be below average while the other one can be above average, and when planning instructions, we have to take that into consideration. Another thing that we need to think about is the language differences, because even though we are all language learners, people who are learning English as a second language tend to stumble up on easier words quicker because they don't know the language as well as most of us. I would like to open this discussion up to the two people that I have with us today, Gabe and Ryan, both history teachers. Would one of you guys like to talk about a developmental, cultural, or language characteristics that differ across the selected grade level of students that you have and that we should be considering when planning instruction?
Hey, yeah, so I'm Ryan. I think it's actually really important for us as teachers to notice that there are a lot of disabilities mentally and physically that students may have when they come into our classroom. One of those that really is prominent in our nation today is ADD and ADHD. It's highly diagnosed, and I believe that a lot of students suffer with that and they have trouble paying attention in class. So we have to differentiate our planning for those students and just to have them listen in and be able to get the information like all the other students do.
Ryan, could you tell us one of those ways that you would differentiate instruction for a student with ADHD or ADD?
Yeah, so a lot of students that have attention disorders really need extra help, and I feel like one way we can do that is by providing all students a transcript or sort of outline of what we went through in the lesson after the fact, just so that they have that with them on hand so they can look back on it, try to remember what happened in class, and also look back over what were the major points and notes that we were going through in that class.
That's super helpful. Do you see any struggles that might come up with that?
Yeah, so a lot of students don't have access to technology, and so I know that usually as teachers we want to make PowerPoints available to students to look at after the fact, but not all the students can go to a computer at home or have Wi-Fi at home to really go onto that internet web source and look at the PowerPoints. And so I think a major thing that teachers need to do is print out maybe a smaller version of their PowerPoint that lists just the major things that we want the students to learn in the topic and hand those out to the students that need it the most.
That would be so helpful. Gabe, do you have anything that you would like to add? Same question goes to you.
I think that he covered the ground pretty well on this. I think that he's right. There is a lot of mental disorders that are going just completely unnoticed, whether it be on the teacher, whether it be on the parent, or maybe the severity might be low enough for it to just fly under the radar. I think that as teachers, we need to be more aware of these things and address them when they come up rather than maybe losing our cool on the student or just labeling the student as a bad student and not helping them. As teachers, we need to do better every year, and we need to get better at helping our students.
That's so awesome. I completely agree. I know that since we are on a podcast, not many people can see you, so I want to bring attention to the fact that you are Mexican. You did grow up Mexican. That was not something that changed later in your life. So you did go through the public school system as a Mexican. Did that affect you in any way? The background, your worldview, did that affect you? Do you think that affects students that have the same ethnicity as you?
Well, yes. For personal experience, I definitely have a different experience from most students as a Latino, because I grew up in a Castro Valley, which is a small kind of, let's say, like to label themselves a former KKK town. I definitely experienced a lot of racism within the school system, such as I learned that my people were savages who were helped by Hernando Cortez, who just conquered the Aztec Empire and destroyed them. Obviously, that's not the truth. So I definitely grew up learning that my history, my past was wrong and bad. Another thing that affects most Latinos, I will say, is the cultural idea of like mental disorders. We don't see those as a legit thing. I have ADHD. I was diagnosed, but my family didn't believe in that. So I grew up without medication. Instead, I just got hit a lot, and eventually get to the point where I just learned to control it on my own. My little brother came around at a time where my parents were more enlightened. When the teacher approached them about his ADHD, they took it serious. He got medication and got so much help. So it definitely I grew up seeing both sides, and unfortunately, yes, as a Latino, it can affect you greatly, just who you are, both in home and in the school system. You definitely can be looked down upon.
So using your very unique story, how will you use that, your worldviews and your background and your ethnicity, to plan your instructions and keep in mind that you have students that have had similar stories to yours?
My experiences have taught me, especially learning, now knowing that things were not as cut and dry as the school system wanted to make it seem like, it makes me more aware of my lessons. So if I need to teach something that might be culturally incorrect, I would try to modify it in a way that doesn't appear racist or might offend a student. I'm not saying like just remove a swastika because that offends a student. I mean, if a group of people is being portrayed incorrectly, make sure it's portrayed correctly so that the people aren't offended.
Great. So just adding more context, making sure that the students understand comprehension, literacy, developmental.
Yeah.
Gabe, do you think that there are any other disorders that we should bring attention to in the classroom?
I think a big one definitely is social anxiety. I think people don't realize how, depending on how bad it is, how crippling it can be for a student. Social anxiety, if bad enough, you could just be seen like you're pure shy, that you don't even want to learn or be there. But the reality is, it's not that you don't want to be there, it's that it fills you with so much anxiety you can't do anything. Some teachers might look at that, and if they don't recognize the signs of anxiety, they just think it's a lazy student or a student that just doesn't care to learn, and he or she may not get the resources they need to help them. Medication is shown to help, therapy is shown to help. If they're not going to get those resources because the parents don't see it and you don't see it, then that student's never going to get better. And I think this is just one of a multitude of other disorders that teachers need to try to see the signs of so that these students can do better. Because if we fail them in these categories, we're going to fail them everywhere else.
Yeah, completely. I agree. Do you have any tips or tricks for parents or other teachers listening for them to look out for students who have social anxiety, and how to pinpoint that and help them through that?
I think for teachers, one of the things that we just need to do in general is not be quick to label a student as a bad student or just assuming the worst. We should definitely come in with an open mind, such as seeing if you find a student that's sleeping all the time in class, instead of you just saying, oh, they're just a lazy student, doesn't want to do anything, maybe talk to the student. Maybe there's something going on at home. They're not able to sleep. And then you can work something out with the student to help them succeed in class. you just look out for some signs. Maybe as a teacher, do some outside research into like disorders, see certain signs, and maybe connect some dots and have a talk with a counselor to see about the student. Do things to help your student. Don't just do the bare minimum.
So just be proactive in your students, not only learning, but their life.
Yes. I think it's very important. You're going to understand as teachers, we're also like a second parent to them in a lot of ways.
Completely agree. They spend most of their life with us from the first day to the last day.
As I was talking, I realized I started thinking about personal biases, and one of the ways that I think teachers can identify them is by just looking at themselves. Probably is one of the best ways. I mean, at the end of the day, you will have some personal bias to someone who looks like you, who has the same things that you enjoy. If, like me as a history teacher, I'm definitely probably going to end up bonding with a student who loves history more than a student who doesn't. And as a teacher, I need to learn to look past that personal bias, because I should be giving equal help to all my students.
Yeah, I really agree with you. I think reflecting on personal biases and assessing resources to deepen personal understanding of cultural, ethnic, gender, and learning differences is critically important for ethical practices, building strong relationships, and creating relevant learning experiences. I also completely agree with you that not all personal biases are negative. I do think that there are positive ways that you can have a personal bias, but it doesn't always affect everyone equally, which is why it could also be a con, having a personal bias. I once heard this story about a teacher who was a football coach, and he had a personal bias against everyone who wasn't a football player, simply because he only memorized the football players' names. And so when he was teaching his history class, he would call on the students that were in football by their proper name, and anyone else he would directly point to, make eye contact, and specifically call the student you. And while those football students felt real special, the rest of the class was left out. I know you've been sitting here, Ryan, just kind of listening to me and Gabe for the past few minutes. Do you have anything to add to this personal bias section?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times as teachers, we realize that not everyone in the classroom is going to love the subject you're teaching. It's not like a passion that they have. And so a lot of the times we give that personal bias to the students that just go into the class loving it, really wanting to be a part of it, and exploring all these different parts. So for example, history is one of those subjects you go into a variety of different things, but a lot of the times we focus on one specific event and the types of things that happen during those events. And I feel like a lot of the time we have to just take a step back, realize not everyone knows what you're talking about, and not everyone knows that these events happened in this way or that way, and they don't really enjoy talking about that either. A lot of the times we go into our lessons saying, hey, this could be fun, but how are we going to make it relevant for all of the students and not just target the ones that are here enjoying it? And I think a good way to give an example of that is recently I was in an economics class and I was teaching a lesson on supply and demand. It's a concept that can go way above students' heads a lot of the times. And I was using $5 words all over the place the first time I was teaching the lesson. Students were not comprehending anything I was saying. And it's really hard because you want the students to know all these words, but you can't use these giant words that students have never heard before. They need definitions, they need an understanding before going into it deeper than we think they can go already.
Yeah, so when speaking about that lesson, I like that you brought up a specific lesson that you have recently taught. I love when we can sit down and talk about specific lessons when we are in different contents. And I think that often histories or math teachers or science teachers don't often enough sit down with an English teacher and talk about how to incorporate literacy skills within your content, even though within Arizona content standards, under your standards, don't you guys have history, language arts standards?
Yeah, we definitely do. So for history and social studies, even the technical subjects like science, we have specific literacy standards that are given to us One of those is to synthesize information from a range of sources, be it from a text or a simulation. Sometimes in our history classes, we like to do role plays. So like, for example, if I was teaching a government class, I would have them each be a different person from the House of Representatives and give their side of the state and what they root for and what they're trying to get passed through the Senate. So a lot of the times we need to synthesize information from a range of sources and try to create a coherent understanding of a process, phenomenon, or concept, resolving in conflicting information when possible. And that can be a really major concept for kids, and it's really hard to teach that, to create this cohesive understanding of who they're trying to role play as, or what exactly they're reading from a text or writing about. And so a lot of the times synthesis can be very hard to teach in a classroom if they haven't already gotten it from a different English class years before.
Right, and I completely agree. And not always do those standards on your history side completely align with those that they're learning in their English class. And like you said, they could have learned it in 9th grade, and now you have them as seniors, and maybe they don't recall it as easily. And you do have to go back over that. So to go into and give you some of my expertise as an English teacher, when comparing multiple sources, like you're saying, and you're looking at a textbook or a journal and an outside source, such as like even a topic of a song or something that all connects together, it's really easy for a student to understand the connections if you break it down to things such as symbols or a theme or even characteristics of certain characters. And so as the teacher, you should already be prepared to understand what those connections are. So are you connecting how certain people acted during times? Are you connecting different types of themes within the works? And one of the things that I have learned is doing a sticky note thing. And so what I do is I give each student one sticky note for each like literacy thing that you're reading. So one for the textbook, one for the journal, and one for the music. And the student will have 3 notebooks. They're gonna have 3 note cards, and then you're gonna put whatever their topic is on the board. So they don't even need to think that far into it. You're gonna give them the theme, you're gonna give them the characteristic, and then they're gonna go into their things and find sources and like find 1 or 2 examples of that within that song, within that textbook, within that journal. And then you can pick a wall and put all of those sticky notes that go with the music on one wall, one for the textbook on the other one, and then you can have kind of like an open house where they walk around, and then they all will end up with a new sticky note that they can go look into the sources and be like, oh look, I didn't see that the first time. Where you are now synthesizing all 3 of them, you're learning about all 3 of them, connecting them to the one topic that you want to talk about. Do you think that you could incorporate that into your classroom?
Yeah, I think that's a major way we could look at history. There's a bunch of different historical figures, no matter the event, and we have to look at the different sides of the stories that we're telling. And a lot of the times, there's really difficult understandings of how to combine primary and secondary sources, but when you group them that way and students are looking around the room and finding different sources and trying to like understand exactly how they all line up, it creates a very simple way of understanding where these things fit in. And I believe that that's just a really easy, simple way to break things down for them.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you, Ryan, for your inclusion on the topic and bringing in the standard and your past lesson that you've already incorporated. That was really helpful. This is exactly what I want out of teachers teach teachers. I want us to sit down and talk about different content standards and learn from each other in different content areas, because there are things that I can learn from you guys also. Speaking of that, Gabe, do you have a standard that you have recently incorporated that was English based? Do you think that it worked well? What do you think didn't work well? How would you change it for the future? Give us all the details.
I think one that's definitely worked well for me is implementing technology more, such as the internet and other things, into my lesson plans and assignments for my students, such as I want encourage my students to use primary resources they can find in the internet, as opposed to always using the textbook as a primary resource. Another thing I've done is I started creating lesson plans that involve my students, making maybe even podcasts like these or videos helping describe, and upload them to YouTube so that there's more history content out there for people to listen to. So by doing these things with my students, I am helping my students achieve a standard in history that works with language arts, and that standard would be the use of technology, including the internet, to produce, publish, and update individual or shared writing products in response to ongoing feedback, including new arguments or information.
I love that standard. Recently, I've incorporated that own standard into my English course by having my students have a blog and publish almost weekly with a group that they're constantly working with on this topic, and just updating their blog about the topic. It could be a hot topic in society, it can be a news article, it can be anything that they are passionate about that they want to tell the world about. So I think that a good way to incorporate this into your class is maybe having it more history based, having them choose a history thing that they want to update about. I know a lot of parents frown down upon true crime, but doing a true crime podcast can be very helpful in helping students understand dates, timelines, locations, things as such. Not all students are interested in that, but differentiating, giving them that option to incorporate true crime can be a really good opportunity for students. Do you think that you would ever incorporate this? And if you did, would you next time incorporate maybe a mini lesson with another English teacher on how to maybe cite sources, on how to publish? Do you think that would benefit your students in any way?
I think one of the things I would definitely do is talk to fellow English teachers to help give me more advice, give my students on finding, resources and good for them to use. One of the assignments I'm trying to plan to implement soon would be maybe having my students make a podcast of some sort, or maybe a video to upload to YouTube. Like I said, this year is the first time I'm implementing this, so hopefully it goes well.
Yeah, I really like the new strategies that you're incorporating. I think technology is a really helpful thing. Going back to what Ryan had said earlier, a lot of students don't have technology resources outside of the classroom, so giving them the opportunity to use technology within the classroom, giving them time and the resources that they need during your classroom is really helpful and can help them set up for the rest of their life. As college graduates, we do know that when we were in college, we had our own laptop. We were on our computers constantly. We had DQs that we had to publish twice a week. We had to respond to people. So using and incorporating this tool will not only help them with their literacy, but it will also help them out in their future endeavors. So going back to the lesson plans that we had talked about previously, I know that we have talked about incorporating World War II and the Holocaust within that, talking about Hitler and all of the excruciating pain that people went through during that time. When we do talk about that in the history class, we have to talk about that in the sense of those people had real lives and people talked about their real lives, while also bringing in texts that show facts and statistics. So do you have any statistical resources that you're going to use, and then maybe I can connect a more young adult literature book to that?
Yeah, I think a big historical resource that kids use when we're talking about Hitler and how he abuses his power in this new world order he's basically creating during the Holocaust and during World War II. We look at the Diary of Anne Frank, for instance. It's a nonfiction resource. We get it from the perspective of a Jewish person living through this terrible event, and I believe that there's just so many good factual resources to look into there. And though there is still some personal bias on Anne Frank's part, because she's not out there in the war aspect of World War II, and she's living in a completely different section. There's different things going on throughout the war. We still get a very personalized view of how it affects people emotionally, mentally, and even physically.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people during that time were in similar situations to her, so looking at the bigger picture and not just looking at one aspect of it is very helpful. I think another really fun text that you could add, fun is an interesting word for this topic, another source that you can add to this topic would be The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I think it gives us a very unique outlook on what happened during that time, and even though it does have a lot of inaccuracies, I think when you incorporate maybe another source that gives more factual evidence to back it up, students can look at the facts that they saw in one text and maybe the inaccuracies in another, and do a compare and contrast and come to a conclusion of what is and isn't accurate in both of the texts. Gabe, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, piggybacking off of Hitler and then this Holocaust thing, it's easy for us as students and or for our students and for people just in general to just look at Adolf Hitler and other things and just say, oh, this is just straight up, they were evil, that's all it was. And this became actually a big issue after World War II, where people were actually assuming Germans were just evil. Hence why the book Lord of the Flies was made, to try to disprove that to some degree. But to just quote something interesting is that Adolf Hitler once said, "And I can fight only for something that I love only what I respect, and respect only what I at least know." It's really interesting to hear something like that from him, considering, it's so easy for us to just turn people into monsters and not realize they're still humans. And, I hope that people will learn to not just blindly turn everyone into monsters, as bad as they are.
Yeah, I really like how we're incorporating a lot of different texts into this one topic. It kind of goes back to talking about prior knowledge and doing little mini lessons and activities to engage the students. And I think you and I were talking about it earlier and how to incorporate different things into one lesson. And one thing that really stuck out to me in one of my classes is using sticky notes. So everyone would read, like, let's say we were doing The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, the text that you guys have on facts and statistics about World War II, and then maybe The Diary of Anne Frank. After reading all three of those, you would have the students come up with words that describe those different texts on 3 different sticky notes. So each one would be colored different, each one would be representations of a different text, and then you would write words that come from that story, so themes, characters, how it made you feel, and then you would put them on the wall, so each wall would have its own color for its own story. And then you would, as a class, analyze what words came up often, what are the themes that we all saw, what are the characters that stood out for us. And I think that's an easy way for students to visualize and connect the different stories. Do you have anything to add? Do you think that you would incorporate that into your classroom?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to incorporate that understanding of correspondence between different types of text. We have a lot of historical fiction novels that get into big emotional depths of what happened throughout history, and that's such an important part of history that I feel like being able to bring that in and incorporate it with the actual facts and evidence, and then the actual biographies that we see that just bring in all these factual evidence to support these emotional novels, kind of just creates an understanding between the kids and what they're reading. And having those themes just physically shown throughout the classroom, being able to see how it works from one to another and how these themes are shown in every type of text, really gives them a better example of what they're reading, why it's important, and why it's a good thing that we're learning these things in the class.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think using the sticky notes or something similar and breaking it down to such a small, 6 words that you have to describe, or even if you did a 6-sentence summary, it's just easier for students to contextualize and understand in smaller formats than maybe a whole story. I know we've talked about a lot of different subjects and a lot of different topics today. As we come to a conclude on our podcast on Teachers Teach Teachers, I think we should kind of talk about what we've learned today and what we've taught each other. So I'm going to start with you, Gabe. I just want to see what you've learned from our talk today.
I think I learned a lot of stuff from you, such as some other ideas to put into when it comes to literature and stuff. from Ryan. I definitely will always learn more from him as we work together, and I'm hoping he'll learn from me. If not, probably just teach him funny historical facts as always. You know, it was a great time here, and I feel like I've had, like, my time was not wasted. It was very much valuable time here.
Personally, I believe that it's such a good value getting input from other teachers and just being able to incorporate that in your own classroom, just bringing all these other ideas in and just making sure that your students are getting the education they need. Even though there's so many different ways we can present it, there's good ideas from everyone, from every walk of life, and I think it's such a good idea for us to just have our students be able to understand that and see that we're not the only ones here trying to help them. There are educators all around the world really working hard to make sure that they become better people and learn more and more about this life that we live in. As a person of faith, as a Christian, I do believe that we're called to really give it all to these two greatest commandments. We got the 10 Commandments. We kind of swept those away. In the New Testament, we got that thou shalt love the Lord with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. But the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that's such an important value to carry around in the classroom. It doesn't matter who your student is. You need to show that you love them, you care about them, and you want them to do the best that they can in your class.
Speaking it back off Ryan, I totally agree with him. I mean, you hear, as a teacher, even as a Christian teacher, you know, you hear all these stories of like teachers trying to like implement God into everything, and they end up getting themselves fired because you're not supposed to be mentioning God, because, you know, there are other people who don't believe in it. You shouldn't be forcing your values onto those students. But however, as a Christian teacher, there's ways to implement your beliefs and implement your values without forcing your religion onto them. You know, just as a teacher, holding those values, being respectful to your students, helping your students go down a good path. You know, if they're someone who's maybe not the best of a person, helping them be a better person is already doing good. And, you know, if your students have questions, you can still give an answer without bringing God into it. You don't have to say, well, the Bible says this. You can just say, hey, I believe that, you know, this would be the best thing to help you with your situation. You know, there are so many ways to bring God into the classroom without having to say his name and help students. You know, sometimes you can't, you know, as I say, save them all, but you can always have people live a better life.
Yeah, I completely agree. To become a teacher in this atmosphere, you have to have some type of compassion for these students and understanding that all of them are ready and able and willing to do great, and they all have the same capacity to do so. Well, that concludes our time today on Teachers Teach Teachers. Thank you, Gabe and Ryan, for joining me today. I hope to sit down with you guys soon and talk about how you guys' lessons went, how you incorporated things that I told you guys might be helpful, maybe see some pros and cons in them, see how we can fix them for later. I can't wait to talk to you guys again. Have a great day, you guys. Bye!
Bye-bye!
Bye!